I was, yeah, to some extent. And this is really an interesting experiment when you think about it. It's as you know, the first time that an outright populist Eurosceptic government comes to power in a major Euro area country, and in Italy of all places, which has long been seen as something of a weak link from an economic standpoint in the Eurozone, and at a time when economic conditions are already becoming less supportive. Now, both parties in the coalition, as we know, dropped their earlier demands for leaving the euro, leaving the single currency. What they did campaign on is a major increase in the deficit, which are now only now starting to implement.
What can the European Commission do to stop them, apart from a gentle proverbial slap on the wrist?
Right. Not much directly, I'm afraid. I think the European Commission, as always, is going to have to rely mainly on market pressure, and I think ultimately it's market discipline that will force the government to back down and at least scale down to some extent the fiscal stimulus they're looking to introduce.
Is there some credence to the argument that perhaps the European Commission would see this number and say, okay, 2.4%, they've really gone for it, they're putting themselves at odds with us, why don't we just not say anything and let market forces do the work for us?
I think there'll be some element of that. I think there's no willingness on the part of the Commission to cause a crisis with Rome, to punish Rome, make an example out of the government. However, I think 2.4 is simply a number that the Commission cannot simply accept outright, and entails a fiscal expansion for next year, whereas Italy is actually required to reduce its deficit further. It will probably actually prevent Italy from reducing its debt, contrary to what is currently projected, which is also quite significant. So I think that we will probably have to see some pushback from the Commission over the next few weeks.
But again, I'm interested in that point because I'm just wondering how far the Commission can go and whether they would go down the route, potentially nuclear route, of actually applying sanctions in this case, especially given that Italy really is a country that is too big to fail. We're not talking about Greece here, we're talking about Italy.
Right. Sanctions are the last step of a fairly lengthy process. Already, I think opening a new excessive deficit procedure already on the back of the budget, or even more seriously, rejecting the budget outright, would be a very strong statement on the part of the Commission. I still think that's a worst case scenario. We're still expecting something of a compromise to emerge over the next few weeks. But again, it will probably take a few more pressure from the EU and especially from the markets before that's possible. The real question at this point is, how much of this pressure are we going to have to see, and how much damage can it do to the Italian economy in the interim?
Do you think that the economy minister, Giovanni Tria, will stay in his position, given that we've significantly overshot where he was looking to get to on this budget deficit?
Yeah, the latest indication is that he will stay. He considered resigning, but reportedly the president of the Republic convinced him not to. However, I want to say that question is irrelevant. I think markets are still focused on his fate, but he's really lost a lot of his credibility at this point. He was seen as a kind of a sane, responsible voice in the cabinet, and his credibility has been really undermined by this decision.
And let's talk about the political ramifications of this. My colleague Willem was just pointing out that Luigi Di Maio was obviously very pleased with the announcement they came out with, because he was the person pushing so hard for the citizenship income. They've announced that in the budget proposal. He's gone back to his base and said, look, I've delivered on my promises of the manifesto. How much of this is just political posturing, given that he looks at the other Deputy Prime Minister, Salvini, who's been charging ahead in the polls, and he's felt a bit of pressure to do something on his side and actually deliver to his base?
Yeah, ironically, the League is normally considered the more maverick, the more extreme party of the two. In fact, around the budget at least, is proving quite reasonable. They have stronger ties, I think, with the business sector, particularly in northern richer regions. I think they're more aware also of the constraints they're working under, more aware of market pressure, and they've been doing really well in the polls. So I think they were really relatively content with the compromise that's emerged. Five Star, on the other hand, has come under pressure. They're more on the defensive, and they're more under pressure to deliver on their campaign pledges. And at this point, I think they've fostered quite significant expectations on the part of their electorate, which is one of the reasons why we do expect more turbulence in coming weeks.
Hey everybody, it's Hadley Gamble from our new CNBC Middle East Bureau in Abu Dhabi. Thanks for stopping by. Now, to watch more, you can try one of the videos that just popped up on your screen. And don't forget to subscribe.